So, guys, something very sad just happened recently. Now, in case you may have heard it, you may not have heard it, but the Pan African media platform, African Streams, I've been following them since 2022. African Streams was just kicked off the, the social media landscape. Now, what happened was Anthony Blinken, that's the the United States Secretary of State, he he was talking about Russia propaganda, normal now as they do. He was talking about Russia propaganda and saying things that has to do with RT and the rest of it. And then in between all that whole thing, he then said that these African streams owned by someone in Kenya, he said it's an outlet for Russian propaganda.
Today, we're exposing how Russia deploys similar tactics around the world. In Germany, for example, RT covertly runs the Berlin-based English language platform Red, a successor to the now defunct RT-Link platform Redfish. RT also secretly runs the online platform African Stream across a wide range of social media platforms. Now, according to the outlet's website, African Stream is, and I quote, a pan-African digital media organization based exclusively on social media platforms, focusing on giving a voice to all Africans both at home and abroad. In reality, the only voice it gives is to Kremlin propagandists.
Okay, no problem. If you say so, I believe you. He said it's an outlet for Russian propaganda and said several things about it, that it is run covertly by the Russians, blah, blah, blah. But he said several things about it. Okay, no problem. And then as soon as he said that, I believe the following day, if I'm not mistaken, African Streams was kicked off YouTube. That means the channel was removed. The following day, it was kicked off Instagram. It was kicked off Facebook. Then we heard news that it was kicked off TikTok. Then we heard news that it had been kicked off Stripe, and Google, like their Gmail accounts, also was was targeted. So virtually all their social media presence, most of their digital presence was taken off the internet. The only thing they have now, to the best of my knowledge, is Twitter, that is X. And this, when I saw this, I was very sad. Like I said, I've followed African streams since 2022. And I like what they say because everything they say it's from an African point of view, from an African perspective, and how is this in Africa's advantage. That's all they discuss. So this thing really pained me, and that's why I want to I want us to talk about it today. The first thing I want to say is it's not this whole thing. I won't say it's just a sad occurrence. I actually think it's disrespectful. Now, if United States, it's very possible. Let's say that African streams is Russian propaganda, and they're just spewing Russian narrative. Okay, let's take that as it is. Why is United States? Why is it now kicked off completely from the internet and from the social media landscape? If United States has an issue with African streams, you can just ban it within your country. That means anybody in America, in the United States, who wants to consume content of African streams will not find it. That is fine. That is fine because you have an issue with Russian propaganda in your country. Okay. And so you decide to kick off the Russian outlet from your country. Okay. But to remove it completely from the internet, that means not just people within the United States cannot have access to content from African streams, meaning that people anywhere in the world, even we here in Africa, thousands of miles away from the United States, thousands of miles away from the United States, we cannot have access to content that is for Africans. This is really disrespectful. Well, anyway, maybe that's what happens when all these social media platforms are under the control of a certain group of people from a certain region of the world. Because it just reminds me of what happened with RT and some other Russian platforms when in 2022 when Russia marched into Ukraine. That RT was kicked off DSTV, if I'm not mistaken. RT was Russia Today was kicked off DSTV. And if you're in Africa, you know that DSTV is the largest satellite cable provider on the continent. And RT was because not because Russia did anything to Africa, wasn't because Russia invaded an African country. It wasn't because Russia upset African leaders or an African leader. Because Russia upset people in Washington, it was kicked off an African cable provider. The same thing that has happened with African streams. You say African streams is Russian propaganda, fine. Ban it in the United States. But because you say it's even the people from RT, sorry, the people from African streams are saying that Anthony Blinken made these accusations without evidence. But let's say it's Russian propaganda. Let's agree that it's Russian propaganda. Kick it out from the United States and let we in Africa decide by ourselves where we want to get our information from. So I think it's not just disrespectful. I think there's some kind of racism. There's some kind of racism with this because you're saying that Africans cannot make a decision for themselves whether or not they want to the kind of information they want to consume. That's what you're saying. That Africans cannot decide for themselves because they are too stupid and they are too dumb to decide for themselves where they want to get their information. So you would help Africa, a continent of 1.3 billion people, you would help us decide where we get our information from because you're smarter than the whole continent. All our leaders, you're smarter than our leaders. Our leaders don't know what is good for the continent. So they'll wait for you in Washington to decide what the people in Africa consume. This is a very, very big overreach. Africa is, we thought we were sovereign countries. You see, that's why I keep saying that Africa did not gain independence. That thing that happened from the 1950s to the 1960s, it was not independence. I keep saying it. Because a sovereign country should be able to make its decisions for itself. We do not need any daddy. We do not need any headmaster in Washington to tell us the information we consume. But like I said before, that's what happens when a lot of all these things are in the hands of a few people in a certain region of the world. That's what happens. Following the complete erasure, following the removal of African streams from all the social media platforms and most of the internet, a lot of Africans have been saying this is why we need our own social media platforms. This is why we need our own um, alternative media infrastructure. And I won't blame them. Quite right, a lot of work has to go into it, but I won't blame them because it's I understand how upset Africans are because I'm upset too. Let us decide we don't want the Russian propaganda by ourselves. And then we'll decide we are not watching by ourselves, not someone from far, far away, thousands of miles away from us, will be making this decision for a whole continent. But here's my message to the United States. Maybe you've not realized, right? But kicking African streams out of the internet in the long run is not going to play in the interest of the United States because you're just giving the rest of the world incentive to create structures and infrastructure away from what you can influence. It was the same way when the US sanctioned Russia and weaponized the US dollars against Russia. That was when we started hearing loud noise, loud clamoring, loud call for de-dollarization. We will not, maybe de-dollarization was just sentiment here and there, but it wasn't a big move like this. But after what they did, when after Biden weaponized the dollar, the whole world said we need to begin to do transactions outside of the USD. Now the United States is realizing that that was a bad move. It was the same way that they sanctioned Huawei, that Chinese mobile phone manufacturer. Huawei used to get its chip from the normal US, Netherlands, that normal supply chain. That's where it used to get its chips for its mobile devices from. But they sanctioned them so that they will not get the chip. Maybe they want to slow down China's growth in certain areas. But what did that lead to? It led to the Chinese sitting down to create their own chip. Now we've seen it. They have launched phones with the chip outside of the structure and the control of the United States. It was not better when things were under your control. But now that, and this is just the beginning, you begin to see other nations getting maybe creating their own mobile phones, their own mobile devices. How many of them will go to Huawei and the Chinese to get theirs? Meaning you have strengthened a structure outside of your influence. Now that you have banned African streams, kicked it out of the internet, most of the internet, we are hearing things like, we need our own, Africa, we need our own. What would that lead to? It will lead to Africa, not just really in Africa, other parts of the world, because the whole world is seeing things like this. It will lead to Africa and other parts of the world creating social media platforms outside the control of Washington. At the end of the day, it will not serve Washington's interests. So keep banning Russia propaganda. kicking out narratives from people you don't like or narrative that you don't agree with. Keep doing it. With time, you will find out that you've not just you've not just created or you've not just influenced the creating, you've also strengthened structures. And when I mean structures, I just don't mean social media. I mean cloud engineering, you AI. You see, you find out that you have strengthened structures outside of your control. At the end of the day, it works to your disadvantage. So keep banning everybody you don't like. Anthony Blinken, keep shutting down voices you don't agree with. Keep censoring voices that say things you do not want most of the people to know. Keep doing it. You're just going to create a structure outside of what you can control. And once that structure comes into play, you realize that that structure is not going to work in your benefit at all. So, guys, let me know what you think about the erasure of African streams from most of the internet. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends and your family so that we can reach more people across the continent.